Good evening and welcome to Murfreesboro City Board of Education Policy Work Session. We'll now call our policy work session to order. We'll now call on Mrs. Baker for our policy review.
Okay, the first policy that you have before you is Board Policy BO49. It's a new policy, and actually I have placed on your desk a replacement for that. You'll see it's marked Executive Committee. After Ms. Wade and I met yesterday and discussed the policy, and I had seen where TSBA had recommended that boards adopt a policy that actually summarizes the duties of the Executive Committee, and all the duties that are set out here in items 1 through 8 are actually set forth in state statute. And the packet that I set before you, I included copies of each state statute so you could see where those duties came from. And just so you know and the public understands, under state law, the Executive Committee consists of the chair of the board and the director of schools. Those two individuals constitute the Executive Committee for the school board. And the chair is to serve, the chair of the school board is to serve as the chair of the Executive Committee. And under state statute TCA 49-2-206, it sets forth the duties that you'll see there in items 1 through 6 as the exclusive duties of the Executive Committee, and those include the Executive Committees to prepare an agenda for each meeting, to prepare the annual budget on the forms furnished by the Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Education. The Executive Committee is to meet at the office of the Director as often as necessary to perform the duties that are required. The Executive Committee is responsible for advertising for bids and letting contracts authorized by the Board. And that duty, of course, is delegated to the Finance Director of the school district. And the Executive Committee acts as the purchasing agent for the Board. That means that the checks that are signed for the board, for the school district, are signed by the director and the board chair. And the Executive Committee is to examine the accounts authorized by the board and ensure that the approved budget is not exceeded. Additionally, under TCA 49-2206, it says that the Executive Committee is to submit for approval to the board a report of the business that's been transacted at since the last regular meeting, and that's where you get your communications are always given to you at each board meeting. Additionally, there's a catch-all for the Executive Committee to transact any other business assigned to the committee by the board. Then I've added, at the request of Ms. Wade, an item 9 that says that the Executive Committee is to appoint board members to various committees as the need arises. And that could encompass committees that are developed exclusively by the board, or administrative committees that the director develops where the director wants a board member to sit on that board. The board chair and the director would work in conjunction to decide which board member would be assigned to the various committees that come up.
Ms. Wade.
Ms. Smith?
So are you currently serving in these capacities right now? Are you signing all these checks and helping advertise for bids and contracts authorized by the board? And I mean, on each one of these items, are you already doing this?
Some things that we don't. Like Kelly has already said, number 4 is authorized to finance. Mr. Anderson takes care of that and brings it back to the board. I know milk contracts and all that, those come to his department and he takes care of it. I too asked Mrs. Baker about purchasing agent. I didn't know what that stood for till she told me. Yeah. But I do sign checks, but it's automatically done. It's done through finance, but there is a form that's taken care of at the beginning by the board chair that Mrs. Ridley and now Mrs. Price will take care of. That'll get to the board chair to get you ready to sign checks. And any paperwork that comes through, a lot of times comes through Dr. Gilbert and not to the board chair. it'll come to Dr. Gilbert, but it is brought to me at meetings. If I need explanation, or if it's something I need to know, Dr. Gilbert explains it to me once she gets it. And I know to sign off, and usually the whole board will sign off on a lot of the paperwork that I get. Dr. Gilbert and I, the agenda, which we hardly ever have a large agenda, but that agenda is taken care of, as it says right there. In the past, it's always been taken care of by the director and the board chair. Once she knows some things that will come to Dr. Gilbert, it has been run by the board chair to see if there's anything you want to add, or is what's on here approved by the board chair. So most of this stuff on here, at some time or another, it's not like an every week thing, but it normally passes by. And the only thing I can say, used to be in the past where the board chair used to assign board members to various committees. I don't know where that fell by the wayside. I never really worried a lot about it. But it is something that's supposed to be done by the board chair and the director, and the board is then made privy to these committees.
Okay, so is there any language that would be more appropriate that you would think for the way that things really happen, with the monetary parts and the advertising for the bidding and that kind of thing?
No. I'd have to, well, Mrs. Baker gave you the legal references. Some of this stuff is mandated and is told how we're going to do it. So we'd have to run that back by Mrs. Baker to make sure that if the board has any language that they feel is unclear.
Well, I do have a few quick points. On number 9, I would want to add and to promptly report the appointment to the rest of the board.
Oh, definitely.
I would like to add that. And then the other thing is, I also would like a number 10, something about communications, because I don't think any of these cover y'all communicating anything to the rest of the board.
Well, number 7, that should be.
Well, a little more than. I mean, you do such a good job at communicating. I don't want that to fall down through the cracks when it's not mandated. When we don't have a fabulous chairperson like Mrs. Wade,
you will,
who is shamefully retiring.
You will. Believe not, you will have good folks. Someone else will do the same. And the reason this policy is so important, the next person that comes into board chair or vice chair, because in the absence of the chair, the vice chair is going to have to be familiar with this also. Mrs. Baker will take into consideration to make sure that we get the number 10 that she put. Now, I need a little more explanation maybe from Mrs. Smith before Mrs. Phillips speaks. What communications, now when we say communications, they're listed on our agenda each time. Are you speaking of something else? We've had conversations before, and I think I know what you're saying. Some things that maybe, now, not all communications, don't ever think it come here. I get it sometimes when you get it. So some things I know that the director cannot, there would be some things she cannot discuss. It would be attorney and Dr. Gilbert privilege. And I may find out a little bit later, but there are some things that communications and business that will not be translated about to the board chair. It just can't be. And you're welcome to ask Ms. Baker, a little bit later about it, some things that we cannot discuss and they would not.
This just seems to be such a big task that's on the shoulders of the chair and the schools director, and I would like for whatever information that came out of these kind of conversations to make sure that they were communicated, whether through correspondence, via email, or in the meetings. I like to find out things before the meeting so I know that what we're coming up with. But
I think if you look at the list there, for example, the annual budget that you all see, when you look at the advertise for bids and select contracts, you all see, I'm thinking bus bids, and Mr. Anderson, you might want to refer to 4 and 5 and 6 there. But I think what you'll find, to examine all accounts authorized the board, for example, the report that you get every month handles that. And I think that number 7 also refers to that. So I'm not sure. I think that as far as the chair on a daily basis, or even the director on a daily basis, as far as bids and contracts and knowing all those specific steps, I'm not going to. I'm going to see the bids just like you see the bids, but that really is delegated to finance to go through all those steps that happen before that. I don't know, Gary, you might want to refer to 4, 5, and 6 right there, and how that's done.
Sure. We follow, and it's in your board policy, that we follow the procurement rules of the state of Tennessee and the city government with advertisements and things. You approve those things, first of all, through the budget process. Secondly, the board chair and the director of schools sign off on those things through the automatic system of purchasing. So we go through all those processes through the normal procedures that are assigned in board policy and state law. So it is allowed to be, the way this is worded, it doesn't mean that the director of schools or the board chair are actually the ones doing the actual work. They give it to the departments to do it, and they approve it through your processes.
And one other thing I'd like to add is, for example, under our procurement procedures, that the school board has to follow the procurement procedures adopted by the city council. So under those procurement procedures, the director and the chair, depending on the amount of a contract, if it's over $25,000 now, the chair's got to sign off on the contract. If it's under $25,000 now, it's the director signs the contract. And that's under the procurement procedures that are approved through your policies and the city council's procurement policies.
Okay. Ms. Smith, did that get all of your questions answered? You still have a question?
No, I would just change line 3 to meet with the director of schools as often as possible rather than at the office of the director of schools.
Okay.
I think that's a little picky, but
All right. Mrs. Phillips, then Mr. Barrett, and then Mrs. Rainier.
Bear with me, y'all. You know, I've been on the board since 2000, and when I first came on the board, in fact, the whole time, mostly that I was on the board, members to the committee were selected by the board chair. If you were not happy, the board chair was reelected every year. You could always, you could always discuss your concerns with the board chair. If you wanted a committee, you didn't want a committee, you could always discuss that. I think that should be left totally to the board chair. I do not think that, I think that the director of schools should have input, and that input should be welcome and solicited by the board chair, but that the board chair should have the final say and responsibility on this. And I'll tell you why, and it's very hard to explain, and I probably won't have the right words, but I do not think that a board member should be beholden to their employee for a position on a committee. Something about that bothers me. I don't think that, I think then we can cross the lines of fairness and, I didn't get my part, so I'm going to give her a bad evaluation. I didn't get the committee I wanted, or, I want that committee, I'm going to give her, I just think that there needs to be a degree of separation to protect the director and to direct the board. So I think the final responsibility should lie with the board chair, with input from the director of schools. And I would like it written in number 9 like that, or I would like a separate policy for it. Can we adapt that, Ms. Baker, to that wording, to where the final responsibility rests with the board chair with input from the director of schools?
If that's the will of the board, we can definitely revise that section.
I make that motion.
Mr. Barrett?
Do you need a second on that?
Yes.
I'll second that.
All righty.
Okay. But I still have questions.
Okay. We're still into the question.
Okay.
There is a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Ms. Baker, should I go ahead and carry that out?
And I want to clarify, is the
Okay.
motion that we have a separate policy or we revise the language in
Which one
number
do you want?
9?
I am happy with either one. I just want it to read that the final responsibility rests with the board chair, with input valued and respected from the director on committee assignments.
Is your motion?
I got a question. Can we discuss the motion?
Oh, let me go back, and
Okay.
she needs to clarify. She said you don't care which one it is.
Whatever would work best for this, for Ms. Baker writing it out. I mean, if she wants to do it all in one policy, I'm fine with that. Which would work better, Ms. Baker?
That's fine. I could do it all in one policy.
Okay, let's
Thank you.
just revise this wording a little bit.
Okay. We'll go ahead and get that motion over with, but there are questions. Is it questions?
On the motion?
Uh-huh.
Mine is.
Mr. Campbell?
Okay, if, this is the first we've seen this, right? Okay. I would suggest, and I'm not saying I'm against Nancy's motion, but I would suggest that we, before we go in here and make some changes and all, that we read all of this material that we have, simply because there are some things in here, if you look, it's duties of the administration and also duties of the boards of education. And some of these things that we are concerned about may be answered in Tennessee Code annotated, and that's where this is coming from. Am I right, Kelly?
Exactly. All the items
So
in
I don't
1
know
through
whether
8.
we can supersede that or not. Well, I guess we could add to it, couldn't we?
Right.
But I think we might be wise to read through the information that we have before we start making changes. I'm not saying I'm against changes.
Well, I understood Ms. Baker to say number 9 was not included in that. Was that true, Ms. Baker?
Yes, the only one that doesn't come straight out of state statute is item number 9 about the committees.
But if you go over and look at local administration and also boards of education, Tennessee Code 492-203, there are a lot of things in here that states what the local board of education is to do. Now, whether or not all these or any of these are in this material or not, I don't know, because I haven't had the opportunity to read through it.
Okay, now.
Is this something that has got to be done tonight? Are we just voting on first reading, or?
This is just being presented to you for the first reading, for the first
Okay.
time.
So I still would suggest that we read through the material we have to make sure that there are not already things in there to take care of what some of our concerns are.
Okay, now you have to remember, this is open for the question
That's right.
concerning her motion.
Well,
Okay. We'll come back. Mr. Barrett, is this a question to this motion?
No, it's not.
Okay, we'll come back. Mrs. Renier, is this a question to
Yes.
her? Okay.
When we're talking about committees, can you enlighten us as to what the committees are? Because when I'm thinking of committees, I'm thinking of like ESP Advisory Board, the school naming committee. Do we have some kind of idea of what these, I mean, I don't know what the
Sick bank.
discussion is.
What
Sick
committees
leave
are?
bank, okay, what else?
Well, I'm the representative of the Schools
Foundation.
Foundation, but I was voted on. I remember that it was presented to the board, and that was, it was kind of assumed, I think, but it was voted on. So that would be different. I mean, so that would be a change.
Well, I just wondered what kinds of committees
I don't think we
and how
changes to it. No.
how much this really will affect anything.
I don't know, and I could not even give you a good guess at the committees. I'm not familiar with them. I do not know.
Okay.
But I know that, Mrs. Ridley, would you be able to shine some light on that? Dr. Gilbert or Mr. Anderson, would the last meeting might be better to bring all those back, give you a chance to research all the different committees? Because truthfully, I don't know. They highlighted a few that I am aware of, but if there are any more, I don't know. And there are going to be committees that are, and I think it is addressed in here, there will be committees that will come up at the will of the director.
Right.
that she will need for different things, like, we did a policy this year for the naming of the school.
Right.
Finally got it in writing. But there'll be things that will come up from time to time, and this will take care of it. Once we get a list, but unless they can share a list, I don't know.
I think those are the ones that I can remember, Linda. I know they bring up the family, yeah.
Preschool advisory committee. So are you talking about just in general committees? There's
I would
still-
think all of them.
It's whatever's needed to get the business done. If a different committee come up, naming, school, building, policy, you could have different committees that
They
come
vote
up.
on the Family Resource Center, preschool advisory, what else?
ESP advisory
ESP
committee.
advisory.
Your textbook committees that you vote on those.
I would be willing to withdraw my question for the time being.
Your motion?
Well, my motion, I'm sorry.
Okay.
While, if my second agrees, while we gather more information about it, I still think it's a strong point. I just don't want, I just don't think the two should be tied together. I don't think it's fair to the director of schools or to the board member, but primarily to our director.
Yeah, I'm willing to.
Okay.
I mean, it's never been a problem in the, but the board's going to, we're going through some change. We're going to have some change very soon. And so I just think that's an important protection to put in. So how do I formally state that I withdraw my motion? Okay. My next thing is, on all these other things we were talking about earlier, would the board chair have any liability if something wasn't done?
She would be protected under the immunity laws that we have for the state of Tennessee for
Okay.
elected officials.
And I would respectfully request a list of all committees, boards, whatever name, that board members have served on, say, in the last 2 years, just to give us a sense of what it is we're talking about. I know that I was also elected to the Community Advisory Council, and that was many years ago. So, that's how that was done back then. And you were nominated by the board chair. On the other hand, I've also known that the board chair just, for quick, small committees, the board chair just, would you mind doing this, So, but that, just think that's important to delineate clearly the responsibility, and it can't become a political point.
Mrs. Rainier, no, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Barrett, Mrs. Rainier.
Well, my question was, or comment was, since it seems like I'm referring to number 4, I think Collier had mentioned it earlier, but it seems like we're delegating some of these functions, and I know they said it's covered in policy. Do we just need to reference that, our board policy at the bottom? I know we're referencing the state code there at the bottom. Do we need to also just reference our own policies there to let people know that we are delegating some of these responsibilities out?
Yes, I could add a cross-reference, and Ms. Ridley usually helps me do that, find the cross-reference to add to the bottom of each policy, so we can see which policies and administrative directives interact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mrs. Rainier.
I guess my comment was kind of along the same lines when we were talking about number 4, advertising bids and letting contracts, and number 5, the purchasing agent, those things being part of the financial department or Mr. Anderson's department. I would think number 2, the annual budget, would also be delegated to his department, correct? The annual budget?
Yes.
And no.
Yes?
Well, it's not that when it is completed, the board has a full discussion.
Right.
Like we had this year, so that's why that one's there. The executive board does not solely make decisions for that budget. Finance sets it up for us, does a wonderful job of getting it printed out. And like we had this year, where we all had discussion. So really, it comes to you.
Yes.
And if I'm trying to remember, I'm thinking that during that budget time, was not each board member invited to come by for discussion. So you're a big part of that budget, although it says the executive committee, you're still a big part of that budget review before we sit down. Directors invited us in to discuss it. So.
But maybe if Mrs. Baker is cross-referencing some of these other points, I would say number 2 would also be included in that, right?
Right. And as Mr. Campbell pointed out, if you'll flip the page, that statute TCA 49-2206, you'll see there, that's where state law sets out the duties of the executive committee, and that's verbatim what's in this policy. Okay.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
So are we, if it's set out by TCA, are we allowed to change it or add an addendum, kind of like adding a number 10 or whatever? That's okay by state law?
You could add additional responsibilities for the executive committee, and of course, the executive committee can delegate their duty to staff to help them carry out those responsibilities.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Campbell.
Ms. Baker, then do we need to have a motion to accept this policy as is on first reading?
Y'all typically wait and do that at the regular board meeting. I just take your comments and input, and I'll bring you back a revised document to the regular board meeting.
So then we will discuss this policy at the regular board meeting in 2 weeks, but we need to get to you before then, any comments or changes or additions or anything we'd like to have with it.
Yes,
Is that correct?
and if you have more changes you want to make at the regular meeting, you can add those.
Ms. Phillips.
And then I don't understand, Ms. Baker, why did my suggestion, why couldn't we have a possibility of that? Why did we have to have a board vote for that if you were going to bring back our suggestions for the other ones?
Well, you were wanting me to change the policy and change any items in the policy. So far, all I've gotten is some verbiage, some minor rewording change.
Well, that is.
Can
we see, or should I write a possible number 9? And
I can draft a possible revision to number 9 for y'all to consider.
I would like to. That would be great. I'd love to look at that. Yeah.
Are there any more questions or comments about the policy, the one that we're working on? Executive Committee?
VO 49.
I almost gave it that title, but then are we going to make this BO 49?
Yes.
Okay.
So I want, for clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Ridley is going to get the list of committees that board members have been assigned to in the recent history in the last couple of years. And on number 9, we are Mrs. Baker is going to make a little bit of change. And are you going to add or put to the point about the reporting the appointment to the rest of the board in that line? Okay, thank you.
If any of the board members have served on committees or serving on committees, get that information to Ms. Ridley, please, so she can compile that to her list, because I'm pretty sure there are a few out there.
Dr. Brown is, but he's not here tonight. He does serve on a committee.
Okay. Well, if you know that one, send it to Mrs. Ridley and put Dr. Brown's name down beside it. And Dr. Gilbert, if you can think of any that maybe we've not used them in a long time, but there's a possibility, I know you'll say something.
Yeah, what I'll do is have Linda go back through the board minutes.
Okay. If there are any more changes or anything you want Mrs. Baker to consider on BO 49, if you would, please send her an email as soon as you think of it, and we'll try not to wait till the day before our next meeting to get that to her. If there's no more discussion, then Mrs. Baker will. If there's no more discussion about BO 49 or suggestions, we'll let Mrs. Baker continue. Okay.
Okay, the next policy that you have before you is Board Policy PER 10, payroll deductions. I have added some revisions to this policy. again, based on state law. Just to clarify for staff relative to the law when an employee's wages are garnished, under state law, if they are being garnished for child support or alimony, there's a specific state statute, TCA 36-5-501, subpart I, that prohibits an employer from disciplining or terminating an employee strictly because their wages are being garnished for child support or alimony. Additionally, there are the federal laws in the Federal Consumer Protection Act. It states that an employer cannot discipline an employee strictly because their wages are being garnished or they have a tax levy waged against them. So there in line 70 through 76, I've incorporated some language to make sure all supervisors are aware of those two statutes so that we are sure that we're in compliance with those statutes.
Are there any questions or comments from Ms. Baker on PER 10?
Okay, then the last policy that's before you, policy STU 58, I've pulled that one because after Dr. Gilbert reviewed it and realized that that does not apply to us because I did not understand how our athletics programs worked. That statute only applies if you are a member of the TSSAA or you're a member of the organization that supervises middle school athletics, and we aren't since we're an elementary system. So there was no need to revise that particular policy, so I've withdrawn that policy. And we can actually just bring STU 58 without the revision back for your review and approval so that it's current and up to date. And then the policy that you have, the last policy, again, is one that is mandated by a change in state law, and that's a new policy, STU 63. It deals with head injuries. It's been referred to by the legislature as the Concussion Law, and they passed a state law indicating that school systems that have youth athletics adopt a concussion policy. And that, again, that state law is very specific in what our policy must include, and we actually must follow the regulations that have been developed by the Tennessee Department of Health. They've developed forms that we're to use to educate our coaches and forms that we're to use to educate our parents and athletes. And they also provide training, the training documents that you use for both the parents and the coaches and the officials that would be officiating your games. The language that you see here in this policy comes out of the statute and indicates the items that the statute says the governing body of the school district shall adopt a policy that. And so I took that language and developed this policy.
Are there any questions for Mrs. Baker?
Comment.
Mr. Campbell.
I asked the question earlier, and I would like for somebody other than me to respond to my same question, where on maybe page 3 somewhere, protocol for registered officials during contest. I guess what I'd like for you to tell us is, what do we consider registered officials? Are these the game officials? What do we have at the school site? And what happens if we think that a child has had a concussion as part of the safety procedures that go along with that?
Okay, this form that you're looking at, the form that's entitled Tennessee Protocol for Registered Officials During Contest, that is one of the forms that we have to use that's been developed by the Tennessee Department of Health. I did not bring with me the definition provisions of the youth head injuries, sports-related injuries statute. I believe they did define registered officials in that statute. I would have to pull that so I could give you the actual definition. But I'm fairly confident they've got a definition of what constitutes a registered official.
I guess what I'm getting at is, and I asked Mr. Barch earlier, the registered officials, if these are the game officials or these officials that are registered with the State Athletic Association, and at the same time, as far as any kind of medical assistance that we might have at any of our athletic contests, whether there's anybody there, and I don't think that there are, but certainly can be summoned if we need them. I guess I'm just concerned about who's going to take care of the child if we think there's a concussion. Is it going to be the coach? Is it going to be the game officials? Is it going to be the school administration? Everybody's going to be trained. Just where are we?
The way the statute appears, the game officials, such as the referees at the game, they have to go through this training.
Okay.
The way the statute appears. The coaches have to go through the training. And then the parents have to receive literature that puts them on notice of the statute, and that's why I included some of these attachments for you. And you could go to the Tennessee Department of Health website as well. There are handouts that you give the parents to help educate them on what to watch for concussions and what concerns you need to have if your child's had a concussion and what kind of care you should go seek. That's all been implemented by the Tennessee Department of Health as to what you need to provide the parents of the athletes. So we have an obligation to give that information to the parents of the athletes, make sure that any officials we use, and when I say officials, I mean referees, and you know better than I, Mr. Campbell. You've actually served as official at athletic events. Those individuals that are out there with the kids, that they've undergone the correct training, and that our coaches all undergo the correct training.
Okay.
Mrs. Phillips.
I'm just really glad to see that they are moving in this direction because the information coming out about how small concussions can accumulate in damage and become a traumatic brain injury. It's frightening. So I'm glad that they're coming out and they'll go through the training, and people are being made more aware of the symptoms so the child can get quicker treatment. I'm curious about the frequency of this sort of injury. Probably not very frequent in an elementary system, but
I have no idea.
It happens in soccer all the time. It's a regular issue that appears, or at least my friends' kids seem to have problems with concussions
all the time.
Yeah.
This in any, I would think there would be more in a contest like football than I would in a contest like basketball.
Yeah.
And we don't have interscholastic football, so that's...
Mr. Barrett.
I got a couple questions. First, on line 16, we need to capital and then spell and then put in abbreviation Center for Disease Control. And then this only applies to like our basketball, our organized groups, within the school system. Okay.
Yes, and there's a definition of school youth athletic activity that is set out in the statute.
Okay. And then, so what if the parents refuse to sign? So I'm assuming they're going to be not allowed to play if they don't sign this form? Okay.
Yes.
And then liability, what happens if they have show signs of concussion after they leave the game, but the coach didn't catch it? Are we liable, or is this all covered? Is this designed to cover that?
This is designed to cover it. That's why you're supposed to give the education information to the parents. Right. If it happens to be symptoms that don't show up immediately during the game, then the parents of the athletes or to receive the information packet so they know what to watch for afterwards.
All right. Thank you.
Mrs. Smith?
In reading, I think I'm kind of getting this head injury policy with the one that we didn't, the TSBA one or TSAA one that we didn't cover tonight. But one thing was that it said that volunteer coaches.
Yes. This state law says that it covers coaches that you hire and pay and volunteer coaches. So if we have some parents that volunteer to coach our basketball program, they would have to undergo the same training that, say, a paid coach would undergo.
And how long does the training take? Does it?
It doesn't appear to be very long. It's actually, if you go to the Department of Health's website, there's a section that shows concussion law, concussion training, and I believe they have some videos that you watch through that website.
But I'm a volunteer coach, and I have still not completed one of my trainings, and it's taken 9 hours. So I just don't want to limit. I mean, I know we have to do this, but volunteer coaching, I mean, these people are giving, their own time when we have paid staff people that could be. I mean, 9 hours is a long time to be studying on things like this. The other thing is, maybe it was in this as well, do we have licensed, like at basketball games, is there an assigned healthcare person at each basketball game? No. Okay, I read that was it this one or in the other one? It must have been the previous one. Okay.
Okay. Ms. Campbell?
You're talking about the volunteer coaches. That's just something that, in my mind, that's something they should be more than willing to do for the safety of one of their players, whether it takes 9 hours or 89 hours. If the paid coach has got to do it, then the volunteer needs to know, because sometimes the paid coach may not be there.
Do we have situations where the paid coach is not there?
Well, I don't know, but a coach can get sick just like a volunteer can get sick. If the paid coach is not there, does that mean that that team doesn't play that night? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm asking. I don't know.
I would think that if they were agreed upon by the school system as a volunteer coach, or in middle school and high school athletics, if the TSSAA agrees to them and certifies them as a volunteer coach, that's what they are. They're volunteer. They're just not paid. I don't know. I'm guessing. That may be something we may need to look at, because if the paid coach is not there, then are we going to not play that night? That team can't play because the paid coach is not there. I don't know.
Dr. Gilbert, then Mrs. Rainier.
If you all have questions specific to this or how our athletics works, if you'll get those to me, then I can have that reported back to you either by email or at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Ms. Rainier, you had a question?
Well, it was basically going to be a comment that I think in our school system, just our little basketball teams, I think that we have a paid coach for each of those teams. I may be wrong, but I believe we have a paid coach.
That's right.
And I think we do too. I'm just saying, if something happens and the paid coach is not there,
And
Vince Lombardi got sick every once in a while.
And just so y'all are aware, this state law has two portions to it. I've only dealt with, of course, the portion that impacts the school district. The second half of the state law impacts recreational programs, whether they're public or private. So, some of the private leagues, their volunteer and paid coaches have to comply with this law as well as the Parks and Rec Department's implementing a very similar policy. So it's the mandate that's come down from the state legislature to try to protect the children.
And you could have that paid coach that got excited one night, and because he got overexcited, is not going to be able to coach for the next game or two.
You would be correct.
And that could happen. Usually, that's the one that's going to get it first before the volunteer will.
And if you would, please, any questions, as Dr. Gilbert has referenced, for the next meeting? You know, this policy, STU 63, will come up again, so let's try to get our questions to her, give her a chance to research that. Do we have, are we finished with that?
Finished.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Baker. Before we get to number 3, I will call on Dr. Gilbert.
Yes, I wanted to, and really to prepare you for the meeting on the 25th, I wanted to kind of prime your brains for what's happening at Overall Creek, because we do have some publicity that we're anxious to get out there. So I'd ask, please, for Lisa and Don, I'm not sure which one, but we do have something to share with you tonight in preparation for the report on the 25th.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm very excited. It's been last 6 weeks have been very busy, and they're going to get busier. And if you want to learn how to roof and help us out at Overall Creek, I'll bring you out there and we'll get it done. But anyway, I'm very happy to announce that we are going to be purple and gold, and I will explain to you how that happened in just a second. And we are going to be the Otters. And the Otters were selected in the same way the colors were, but the Otters was a little bit longer than the colors, the process, in that we kind of threw out, when I was announced as principal a few months ago, started throwing out different mascots just everywhere, just kind of asking people to contact me, let me know, and Otters seem to come back over and over and over again. I did some research on my own, and they are friendly, they're very smart and intelligent, they take care of each other, they stay in families, and since we're going to have an environmental focus at Overall Creek, which I'll talk about in a couple of weeks, they really like clean water and clean environments. So if you have clean water, clean environment, then you might see otters in those environments. So hopefully the water at Overall Creek will be clean, and we'll see some. But anyway, obviously, and we liked how it flowed too, the Overall Creek Otters. So if you say it a few times to yourself, you'll see how great that is. The committee that was put together consisted of Mr. Barrett, and he graciously helped us out on that. We had some teachers, we had some parents involved, and that was about it, and some community members. And it was looked at colors and to be different from the rest of the city schools was one of the main goals. And then Otters is also unique. So, without any further ado, I would like for Ms. Trail to show you the actual logos that have been developed for Overall Creek.
Pull these up.
You want a drum roll?
What?
I can't do that.
So if you look on your screens,
Oh, there you go.
on both sides, Overall Creek Elementary Otters. This is the new logo for Overall Creek. We're very excited about them. It is purple and gold. We have a couple of different versions of this. This otter was drawn by an illustrator, Steve Barker, for our use, and so no other otter exists like our otter. This is the black and white version of the logo. This is how the otter will stand alone. So if we ever need to use him standing alone, he will appear this way, or she. It's an undetermined nature. This is the secondary logo that complements the original logo. This will be used mostly on our sporting equipment, so our basketball, our cheerleading, those type things. So we are very pleased that the otter is nice and friendly. And then if we choose to use the logo without the otter, it will appear as Overall Creek. This will be like with Mr. Barch and his team with polo shirts and different things like that. So we're really happy with the way that they turned out. It was a nice process, had a lot of good input on it. And again, we looked for after we determined an otter, we wanted it to look friendly. We wanted it to look like it would belong in a pre-K through 6th grade. And I think that's what it has. It's got a really nice, friendly, elementary look without being too childlike and not too mean-spirited either. So that is your new overall Creek Otter and the logo that goes along with as we go forward, because we will start doing the marketing as we go forward. We want those children to come to our schools. And like Mr. Barch said, we've worked really hard. We're really pleased with how this came out, and it was kind of nice to see the committee in progress and see this kind of come together. So.
And you have some gifts, but I'll give you a preview. It's a big one. I think it fits me. But there's what we're going to look like on the shirt. Oops,
Cute.
All right, so you have some gifts of a T-shirt and down low for you.
Thank you.
Anyway, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, before you leave the podium, there's a comment, a question from Ms.
Okay, I'm
I just
sorry.
want to tell you, ought to be proud. And you ought to get a little puppet to come visit Murph.
Oh, all right.
No, y'all did a great job.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun. We're excited.
Questions or comments for Otter Creek before they?
Looking forward to our visit.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Be nice.
We do have 2 visits set up for you guys, so one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Again, we want to encourage you to wear your boots. It is muddy. It is obviously still under construction. So I know we sent those dates and times to you, so I think most of you have responded back with times that will work for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it for you, Dr. Gilbert?
That's it.
Okay.
We just need to do some recruiting.
If you would, review the draft agenda for our February 25th meeting here at 6 o'clock.
We need to recognize Ms. Ridley's replacement.
Is there anything you need added? If there's anything you need added to the agenda, if you would, please send an email to Dr. Gilbert. And, we'll have our policy. So if it's anything that you see might be missing, please send it on. Mrs. Ridley or Dr. Gilbert, if you would, don't mind introducing our board and audience to Mrs. Price. Mrs. Ridley's replacement. I set that real low.
Would you like to do that now?
Yes, and then again at our regular meeting.
I'm going to let Ms. Ridley do that.
All righty, thank you.
I'm very pleased to introduce you to Melanie Price. She is an current employee with the city schools in the instruction department. She's bringing a wealth of knowledge about the district. She has worked in a district attorney's office. She's working in a legal office, which just excites Kelly all to pieces because she knows how those minds work. And I think she will be just a great support to you and to Dr. Gilbert. So I'm very pleased to introduce Melanie Price.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
And at our 25th meeting, if you would, to do that again. Sure. Dr. Gilbert, to make sure, or if it's anybody else that you want to introduce that we need to, it's fine. If there's nothing else, board members, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second.